Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to the Asia Solar Energy for Climate Change Conference. It's a platform that's dedicated to harness the power of renewable energy in our fight against climate change. This conference is organized by CarbonCare, InnoLab, and funded by the Jockey Club Charities Trust. I'm your moderator today. My name is Bonnie Au, and it's my honor to be here to host this session on uncovering policy and technological obstacles in Hong Kong and Asian cities. So as we can see from the title, this session will be exploring some of the technical and technological obstacles that Hong Kong and other cities in Asia faces. And I will then look into what are some of the other possible solutions to overcome these barriers. Okay, so joining us today, we have Dr. Pascal Furchard, Director of Climate and Sustainability from Deloitte, Mr. Kevin Lee, researcher at CarbonCare InnoLab, Dr. Mark Acrofi, postdoctoral research fellow at Kyoto University and United Nations University. And lastly, we have Dr. Samaba Bandopatai, teaching assistant at the West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences. She's also a facilitator, Asia Pacific Hub, and advisor at Youth Club, Global Alliance for Rights of Nature. So each speaker will then take in turns to give their sharing on the topic. And then after that, we'll have a short Q&A session with our speakers before opening up to the floor to take further questions from our audience. In a few moments, we'll kick off the session with Kevin. He'll be giving us an overview of Hong Kong's climate policies and also talk about the interventions made by CarbonCare's Paris Watch reports. Before I get to Kevin, if you have any questions for our fellow speakers later on, feel free to leave your questions in our Q&A box. There's a chat box underneath. Feel free to put your questions in there. So, okay, without further ado, I guess we'll pass it on to Kevin. If you can start sharing your presentation.
Start sharing this. Okay, I start from the beginning. Oh, thanks so much, Bonnie. Good morning and afternoon or evening, distinguished guests. It's my great pleasure to share my thoughts at the conference. Actually, my name is Kevin Lee, the researcher from CarbonCare InnoLab. Today, I will be discussing a little bit on the policy and technological obstacles that Hong Kong and other Asian cities are facing in upscaling renewables and achieving net zero emission, with a focus particularly on Hong Kong. As we actually embark on this critical journey towards a net zero future, it is essential to understand the context and the challenges that lie ahead. Hong Kong, like many other Asian cities, has been working diligently to reduce its carbon footprint and transition to a low carbon economy. However, the path to net zero is not without its hurdles. Actually, let me show you the papers that have been issued by the Hong Kong SAO government on climate change, on tackling climate change. Let us begin by examining these papers, list Hong Kong's journey to net zero from the different levels. First of all, I will start talking about international framework. Of course, you may have already heard of that. Actually, UNFCCC actually had been passed in 1992 and entered in force in 1994, and the Kyoto Protocol adopted in 1997. Actually laid the groundwork for global climate action since these years. In 2007, APEC they actually made a very bold commitment to reduce energy intensity by at least 25% by 2030, using 2005 as the base year. This pledge, known as the APEC target, marked a significant milestone in the fight against climate change. Hong Kong, as a member of APEC, adopted the target. The Paris Agreement actually adopted also in 2015 at a historic COP21, further solidify the global commitment to climate change and limit the global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So basically, these are the international framework actually guiding the whole, the city's journey to net zero. And at the national level, of course, we don't forget about, our central government. They also actually playing a role in influencing the journey of Hong Kong. Basically, for mainland China, it's actually a key player in the global climate arena. And ASECCC, they actually announced a voluntary target in 2009 to reduce carbon emission, basically based on per unit of GDP by 40 to 45% by 2020 compared to 2005 levels. This target actually demonstrated China's determination to address climate change and promote sustainable development. So as a special administrative region of China, Hong Kong SAR with its own target is committed to supporting these national targets and contributing to the global effort to mitigate climate change. So at the city level, actually the Hong Kong government has been setting its own climate target and implementing climate policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions since 2010. So in that year, the climate change strategy and action agenda consultation document was issued, outlining Hong Kong's voluntary commitment to reduce carbon intensity by 50 to 60% by 2020 compared to 2005 levels. This target was later increased to 65 to 70% by 2030 in the Hong Kong Climate Change Report 2015 and the Hong Kong Climate Action Plan 2030 Plus. So demonstrating the city's growing ambition and determination to combat climate change. In 2021, the Hong Kong SAR government took the significant leap forward by announcing a Climate Action Plan 2050, which sets a more ambitious interim target to reduce carbon emissions by 50% before 2025 compared to 2005 levels. This plan represents a crucial milestone in Hong Kong SAR's journey to net zero, as it outlines 4 major decarbonization strategies, such as net zero electricity generation, energy saving, green buildings, green transport, waste reduction, etc. To support these efforts, in 2021, the chief executive pledged to Hong Kong dollar 240 Hong Kong dollars billion for the city's climate action over the next 10 to 15 years, highlighting the government's commitment to investing in a sustainable future. But despite these efforts, we published the Paris Watch Climate Action Report since 2018. It's kind of actually the flagship report of CarbonCare InnoLab. Has identified several policy gaps and challenges that must be addressed to accelerate Hong Kong SAR transition to a low-carbon economy. These challenges include inadequate science-based targets, ambition deficit, regulatory shortcomings, continued fossil fuel dependency, insufficient contribution and coordination, and physical resources, and a lack of transparency and accountability. So these are actually the gaps that actually identified in the report. Actually, you can take a look if you have a time, and actually you can download the reports from our website. So moreover, technological constraints pose significant barriers to the adoption of renewable energy and the achievement of net zero emissions. Low renewable energy penetration, rising energy consumption in residential sectors, inadequate climate resilience are among the key issues that need to be tackled. The lack of comprehensive key performance indicators, baseline data, and robust monitoring evaluation systems for climate adaptation further compounds these challenges. To overcome these obstacles and accelerate a transition to a sustainable future, CarbonCare InnoLab actually recommended a series of bold actions. First and foremost, actually, it is very crucial to adopt ambitious and science-based targets that align with the urgency of climate crisis, in line with the Paris Agreement 1.5 degrees Celsius goals. These targets should be informed by the latest science evidence and the recommendations of the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. Second, enhancing renewable energy goals actually is paramount to reducing reliance on fossil fuels and accelerating the transition to clean energy. This can be achieved by setting more ambitious renewable energy targets informed by the local academic research and best practices from around the world. Third, implementing mandatory energy audits across industrial, commercial, and residential buildings are essential to improving energy efficiency and reduce energy consumption. These audits can help identify the areas of improvement and drive the adoption of energy-saving technologies and practices. Fourth, ensuring a just transition through public engagement and sufficient physical support is very crucial to building a sustainable and equitable future. Engaging the public in the decision-making process and allocating adequate resources to support interdepartmental coordination and climate action initiatives can help ensure that no one will be left behind in the transition to a low-carbon economy. Finally, improving transparency and accountability in the allocation and spending of the pledged 240 billion Hong Kong dollars in the next 10 to 15 years are essential in building the public trust and ensuring that resources are used effectively and efficiently. Providing detailed plans on how these funds will be allocated across mitigation, adaptation, and resilience efforts can help foster a sense of ownership and responsibility among stakeholders. In conclusion, the path to net zero is not without its challenges, but by addressing the policy and technological obstacles that lie ahead, Hong Kong and other Asian cities can accelerate their transition to renewable energy and achieve their net zero goals. It is through collective action, bold leadership, and unwavering commitment that we can build a sustainable, resilient future for all. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to engaging in a meaningful discussion during the Q&A section. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing, giving such an insightful sharing about the progress of Hong Kong's journey to net zero. So I just want to give this timing a quick reminder as well for our audience. If you have any questions for Kevin, feel free to put it in the Q&A box below. Next up, we have Dr. Pascal Burchard from Deloitte. He'll be sharing with us the potential of some of the BIP fees, which is basically building integrated photovoltaics, and how these are applied in cities, specifically in Tokyo and Hong Kong. So we'll have those slides shared from our end. So Charlie from our backend team will make sure the slides are up there. In the meantime, I'll pass it on to you, Pascal, so you can give us this quick intro about what they are and tell us about it.
Absolutely right. Can you hear me all right, like this?
Yes, very clear.
Very good, very good. Very sorry about the internet issues, but great that it works. And very honored to be here again, and look forward to discussing BIPV, building integrated photovoltaics, in a bit more detail. They address one particular topic Kevin just mentioned before as well, right? So the penetration of renewable energy in a very densely populated city like Hong Kong is not as easy, but it's possible, right? And what I want to do in the next 10 to 15 minutes or 7 to 10 minutes is to discuss a bit more how we could do that and how policy can also be an angle to help us on that journey. So very good. If you can go to the next slide, please. I just want to start off with you know, showing you solar PV is great, right? We all know it, we all love it. It's amazing. It's also continuously outgrowing our expectation, as you can see on this slide, right? So solar PV has always been underestimated in terms of growth. These are the exponential curves which we all like. However, even though having these exponential curves, we still have a gap between what is actually being deployed and what is possible to be deployed with solar PV. And the question therefore is, how can we, you know, keep or even increase the current growth rates of solar PV adoption, especially also in a city like Hong Kong? And for that, if we can go to the next slide, we need to speak about one particular application of solar PV, which is the so-called building integrated photovoltaics. And just by means of introducing it a little bit, in the end, what it refers to is photovoltaic materials which replace, to some extent, conventional building materials, such as, you know, in the facades, in skylights, on roofs, potentially as well. But the biggest applications we do see in the facades, right? And you can see the picture on the lower left. That's one particular example from Tokyo, where, you know, the building facade is being used to produce electricity and reduce building materials overall. And that's great because we do have quite favorable market conditions also in many Asia-Pacific cities. You know, Tokyo is no different than Hong Kong in the sense that we have limited space for ground-mounted systems, right, which lowers the potential of penetration of renewables. We have a high turnover of housing construction, which we all know. We also have some sort of policy mechanisms in place. For Japan, in Tokyo in particular, they had a few elements which were very relevant to drive BIPV in their setting. Tokyo is currently maybe the city in Asia Pacific with the highest penetration of BIPV. They have a very good partnership between the manufacturers and the construction companies and the government. And they also have some sort of specific BIPV feed-in tariff. And I just want to reflect a bit, you know, how we could also make use of this example of Japan and Tokyo in the Hong Kong context. So if you can go to the next slide, we see what we need to do here in Hong Kong. Kevin very nicely illustrated that before, right? So the use case for Hong Kong and BIPV is a very big one because we do have a rather low renewable energy penetration. We have quite ambitious targets, and one way to increasing, you know, our non-fossil fuel sources of electricity production could be BIPV. And if you just refer to one paper, which of course is looking at the maximum adoption of BIPV done by City University here in Hong Kong, if I'm not mistaken, 11,600 gigawatt hours of potential of BIPV in our facades of our buildings here in Hong Kong. If you translate that into, you know, overall share, that is roughly 25% of our current electricity need as a city. Now, of course, that's the maximum estimate, right? Practically, we might not be able to fully exploit that, but just leveraging a significant chunk of this potential could already help replace a large part of the current still coal power being used in the city of Hong Kong. Now, for that to happen, we need to look at how we can scale BIPV in Hong Kong. And if you can go to the next slide, I just want to kind of give you three kind of major success factors how to boost BIPV in Hong Kong. So the first one, and based on kind of peer examples in Tokyo and other cities, we need to have a supportive policy framework. That means it needs to be consistent. It needs to be supportive in terms of size of investment subsidies given. And the good news here is that in Hong Kong, we already have certain schemes in place which do help to scale solar PV. And if you look back into the you know, chief executive's budget speech just a few months ago, one particular part was around the launch of a pilot scheme on building integrated photovoltaics, which of course for me was a great thing to hear, because this is exactly one step in the right direction of providing a supportive policy framework, potentially even leading to a specific feed-in tariff for BIPV in Hong Kong. So that's the first step, which we still have some work to do, right, in terms of providing a good policy framework. If you can go to the second step, which is on the next slide, is we need to leverage new business models to boost that, right? If you look at Tokyo and also other cities, how they boost this in the city, they make use of a business model which is called community solar. And in the end, that's a model where citizens also get the opportunity to participate in the energy transition. So meaning that citizens which don't own a roof can also actually benefit from investing into solar PV, solar installations, and get benefits in return on the electricity bill by financial compensations. That's a community solar business model, which in a market like Hong Kong currently is not feasible due to regulatory constraints. However, if we address this, BIPV community solar has proven to be a very successful business model in other jurisdictions in Asia Pacific, but also around the world. So if we enable new business models, we will also enable the growth of BIPV penetration in a city like Hong Kong. And if you go to the last one, the third one, the success driver is definitely public-private collaboration. And I think we need that in many, many different ways to reach our climate targets, especially in a city like Hong Kong, which has such a high share of buildings and high and tall buildings with lots of facade. We need to have a good collaboration between the building owners, the developers, the governments, and the utility companies which are helping to install and drive BIPV. And just a quote here, one significant player in the solar industry, Alexander Somstay from Solar Europe, right? I think they have been looking at BIPV for quite some while, and based on their assessment as well, BIPV today is very much at the turning point. So the market is ready, the costs have come down, the applications are here, building materials are expensive, so it's time to make use of this solution to scale BIPV, but also importantly scale renewables in a city like Hong Kong. Very good. I think that's what I wanted to share as food for thought, right? In terms of how we can actually increase the penetration of renewables in a city context like Hong Kong, and making use of our many, many facades. I'm standing here in one of the buildings looking at one of the facades out here. So much potential for BIPV and significant business opportunities as well for anyone who wants to be engaged in it. With this, I'm going to stop and look forward to discussing any questions you might have at the end.
Okay, thank you so much, Pascal. It's good to hear that, that Hong Kong does have possible solutions, and the fact that, with the new budget coming out, and there's the fact that, there's a pilot scheme that's going on. So hopefully for Hong Kong, that will be one to more of these buildings that will adopt some of these new technologies, and hopefully, we can, be one step or two steps further closer to cleaner energy. Okay, so after taking a look at some of these, possible solutions for cities like Hong Kong, and also, Tokyo obviously is one leading example. And then we also had Kevin talking about some of the policies and things like that. So I think it'd be a good time to now get to Mark Akrofi to, talk about some of the challenges, that some of these cities, so specifically Bangkok and Jakarta, some of the challenges that the cities face in adopting some of these renewable technologies. So Mark, tell us about it.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. And first, I'm very grateful for the invitation to share our ongoing research. So as you did mention earlier, my name is Mark Akrofi, and originally I'm from Ghana, but I've been in Japan for the past 4 years. And I currently doing my postdoc with Kyoto University and the United Nations University, but I'm based in Tokyo. And this is one of the projects that the UN University recently did in Jakarta and Bangkok. So we looked at challenges to renewable energy uptake at the household level. And I think that Dr. Pascal's presentation and also Dr. Lee's presentation set a very good context for me to give some maybe specific challenges from the perspectives of households. So just a broad overview of the renewable energy challenge in cities. I think globally, nearly 2/3 of carbon emissions come from cities, and this is because cities are also like the centers of economic activity. So there's a lot of energy consumption that goes on in these cities. And if you look at the Asia Pacific context, most of the electricity consumption is done in the industrial sector, which is not surprising. But then the residential sector comes in second, which makes it a very important sector to also look at, even though in terms of emissions, it's around the 4th sector. Now, we surveyed 2,000 individuals at the household level just to get their insights. So this includes those who have installed rooftop PV systems or are using some sort of renewable energy in their homes, and those who have not installed any of these systems. So we tried to find out what were their motivations and what were some of the barriers or challenges, and what policy recommendations can be made from that. So this is a very initial analysis. We just got the data a few weeks back, so we have not done any detailed analysis yet. So most of the results here are very descriptive, just basic statistics to show. So one of the key issues, and I think building on Dr. Pascal's presentation, is the issue of the technical feasibility. So in cities like Jakarta and in Bangkok, they are characterized by high-rise buildings, and most of these buildings have been in existence for a very long time. And this is not a challenge specific to these cities. I think in most cities, the problem that we face with these renewable energy systems, especially the BIPV, is that at the time these buildings were being built, people didn't think that there will be a time in the future where we'll have to integrate solar systems into them. So those considerations were not made, and it makes it very difficult to integrate them into a building that is already existing than to do that in a new building. So one of the key concerns that the participants shared was the fact that when it comes to the ease of installation, either on the rooftop or either integrating into the facades, this is a challenge that prevented some of them for opting not to do that. The other one is also the question of maintenance. So at least households need some basic knowledge of how these systems work to be able to operate it and do some basic maintenance on them. And with the technicians, I think that we still have very few and not so many accessible technicians in this city, so it becomes a challenge. So one of the key insights here is the need for urban planning to kind of consider this infrastructure, especially when we are doing urban renewal projects or designing new neighborhoods. For example, in Tokyo, I think from this August, it's going to be mandatory for all new buildings to have solar PV systems installed on them, because it's much easier that way than to finish the building and then try to integrate the PV systems. And then the second insight here is the issue of the peer influence, and also ties to the issue of community solar that Dr. Pascal mentioned. So if you look at the third factor here, you realize that most of the participants rated this more than 800, that this is very important for them to use a renewable energy technology in their home. They will be much more eager to do that if they already spoke with someone who has an experience using that technology. So peer influence in this case is very important, and not just to influence the adoption, but in places like Europe, where there's a lot of research on these systems, there's this term called NIMBY, which is like not in my backyard. So some people, like your neighbor, can disagree with you if you want to put solar in your panel, because it sort of obscures maybe their view from their home, or even in the home, if it's a shared apartment, some people will object that it might affect the design or the aesthetic value of the building or the neighborhood. So it's very important to consider this peer influence, and the community-based initiatives are also very important. So in this case, you might not necessarily have to put like a solar PV on the roof. You can have a ground-based PV system that is shared by the community members. And then the third insight here is the issue of cost, which already cut through most of the presentation. So even though solar costs have been going down, like in the past decade, still at the household level, getting like a PV system or a renewable energy system that can meet the household needs is still quite challenging, especially when it comes to storage. So most PV systems, especially on the roof, kind of produces more energy than the households can store, because the batteries actually are very expensive. So it becomes a challenge. And in cities, like I'll show later, I think it was in Jakarta, they have, or Indonesia in general, they had like a net metering policy where households that use PV can actually feed in the excess to the grid, and then the national utility pays for that. But just 2 months ago, they decided to abolish that policy, because the utility sort of felt, instead of selling power to people, I'm now buying. So financially, they don't find it very compelling. So this is one of the key challenges. Issues of subsidies are very important, but also it's good to balance how the adoption of this PV kind of affects the existing power utilities. And then the last one, I think, is awareness of government incentives, which is also very important because people raise the issue of cost. In both cities, we found that there have been some incentives, like in Bangkok, there's a tax incentive for people who adopt like solar home systems. And then in Jakarta, like I mentioned, there's a net metering policy. So most people, as you can see from the chart, quite a number of them, like almost half, in terms of those who know about it, don't even know how to apply for it. And then there's quite a number that also don't know how to apply. And one of these things about the incentives is that it's not also limited to, say, Indonesia and Jakarta. People, normally the incentives are supposed to make the solar cheaper or the renewable energy cheaper. But then for you to be able to benefit from it, you have to be able to do some paperwork. So for those people that are not very conversant with this application materials or do not have the necessary level of education about how these things work, it means they miss out on this kind of incentives. And these tend to be like the low income, say, households. So it's good as a policy option to enhance information and access to resources about this kind of incentives, which will also boost the uptake of these technologies. Now, in conclusion, just drawing some lessons from Japan, I did my PhD research on rooftop solar home systems. So this is actually a solar city. They call it Sustainable Smart Town in Japan. It was planned and built from scratch and with the goal of achieving 70% integration of renewable energy. So I visited it, and one of the key lessons here is that, as I did mention, it's much easier to plan this before the neighborhood or the house is built, which is why they've been able to achieve this. And one initiative that the Tokyo Metro government also put in place is to develop a solar map for the city so that it's easier for people to determine, if I want to have solar in my home, how much potential can I have? It used to be a challenge, but now if you have access to that map, you can just click on the location of your house and you can get a fair estimate of how much it is going to even cost you. And also the last point I already mentioned on the installation on new buildings is the issue of integrated urban planning. So I think these are some strategies that can be adopted to promote renewable energy uptake in both Jakarta and also Indonesia, as well as some other Asian cities. So thank you very much. That's it for my presentation, and I look forward to the discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was good to see, the sort of contrast from, more developed cities like Japan and how successful that they're able to adopt some of these technologies, and also the challenges faced by some of the less developed cities, or, some of the existing buildings, how is it to adopt some of these, the challenges, to sort of adopt these technologies into these existing buildings. So I'm just looking at the Q&A box right now. I see quite a few questions already coming in, so keep those coming. We'll be getting to the Q&A session very soon. But before that, so let's get to our final speaker, Dr. Soumabha Bandopattai. So she's going to tell us what role rights of nature play in ensuring a better and more efficient smart cities. She'll be sharing also a couple of case studies to help illustrate that. So I'll hand it over to you now, Soumabha.
Thank you so much, Bani. I hope I'm audible and visible. So this is what I have for the discussion in this otherwise very technically sound, panel. So I'm here to kind of propose a very different kind of framework. And since all the other panelists are, ones who are working on developing cities and developing them in some sense, smarter. So that's why I chose to use that term there, because one of the sustainable development goals, which I shall also be referring to, also talks about making cities smart cities. So I am Soumabha Bandopattai. I am from India. I teach at the West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, and I primarily teach human rights law. I have also specialized in international law. And my passion also, I found my passion on with regard to rights of nature while I was pursuing my master's. And since then, I have been associated with the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature, GARN. And I am at present the facilitator for the Asia Pacific Hub and the advisor to the Youth Hub of GARN. So having said that, what I'll quickly try and do is to lay context to what is rights of nature. And from the definition that the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature has crafted, we see that rights of nature is about really balancing the needs and expectations of the human world with that of the other world. So often when we talk about the existence, harmonious existence, we talk about the human existence. And the baseline for this entire understanding of environmental law is largely anthropocentric, and that has possibly been the reason why it has failed to show its maximum output even today, even though it has been so many decades past Stockholm, even if we consider that to be really the beginning of the environmental law regime in the world. So rights of nature is about really looking at this interconnectedness of the world. As the word that has been used there is that all ecosystems on our planet are deeply intertwined. So we are attempting to look at bringing changes with this paradigm shift from anthropocentrism to ecocentrism, maybe sometime later, but through a passage of anthropomorphism, as a lot of scholars have really debated. But how is it really possible when we talk about building cities where we need to possibly, so-called clear out certain forest areas, clear out or fill, the fields to make the buildings and all of that? So how do we do it? So the point here is that rights of nature is not talking about only the rights of the natural world. It is about the natural world, which includes both the humans and the non-humans world. So how do we really get this to working? So while I was preparing for the panel discussion today, I thought that, where can we have the interjection and where can the intersections come in? The intersections come in when we look at Sustainable Development Goal 11, where we talk about making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So it is the sustainable part where the rights of nature considerations have to come in. And when we talk about Sustainable Development Goal 11, specifically we see 11.4, 11.6, and 11.7, the targets, which have that scope where we interject rights of nature. When we talk about preserving and safeguarding world's cultural and natural heritage, we are essentially talking about maintaining the balance between the indigenous population, especially in countries where we have indigenous population, especially in this part of the world where we are talking about. And so we have to ensure that, we do not, in the attempt of making bridges and cities smarter, we do not really take away that identity, that heritage, because that will not make it a sustainable city. And that will be actually against 11.4 target. That's exactly how I look at it. 11.6 talks about the air quality and the waste management. Again, certain considerations which are very much taken while we talk about making and building cities, and how we really look at how the cities would be sustainable. That's again one dimension where rights of nature considerations would be very, very important. And I shall show certain examples as to how that it has become quintessential because of certain examples from India, from where I am. So 11.7 is, of course, something that a lot of countries have taken into account these days, is about ensuring green and public spaces for the women, the children, the elderly population, and people with different who are disabled. So we see that, rights of nature considerations can be fed into all of these Sustainable Development Goal number 11, which is really about making cities and human settlements sustainable. Because sustainability is not only about the sustenance of the human beings, it is about the sustenance of Mother Earth And we as humans really cannot sustain if Mother Earth does not sustain. And this is something which many times we forget, and hence we see the problem of anthropocentrism lying at the core of all the policies that we make, lying at the core of every developmental discourse that we talk about. Rights of nature is not against development. It is only about ensuring that the development does not exceed the human need and the needs of the non-human world. So if I move ahead with this, I was thinking through what could possibly be the kind of initiatives which could be taken in other cities. And for that, I have a couple of examples from India. So when we look at this interplay of rights of nature and developing these cities, and as I say, smarter cities, I can give the example of a particular legislation in India, which is about protecting the rights of the people dwelling in the forests. It is a legislation of 2006, where the sacred groves have been protected. So now I'll give an example of what has happened in several states in India, including Bangalore, which is Karnataka state, and the city of Bangalore, or Bengaluru as it is called, where I happen to, get a glimpse of how this has worked out. So the sacred grove is in the middle, in the heart of the city. So, the protection that has been accorded to that entire area where the sacred grove is, and at least about a couple of kilometers from where the sacred grove is, that has remained untampered. So, that has led to a better air quality in that area. And as I mentioned in the Sustainable Development Goals 11.4, 11.6, we see that the cultural and heritage of that region, of that city, has remained. So while we develop, because Bengaluru is one of the most developed cities in India, and it is the IT capital of India, as we say. So we see that, even though a part of the city has grown, we see these have also been preserved. And that is what rights of nature tries to bring the balance for. The same again is from the city of Bengaluru, where the hills, Nandi Hills, has so much of ecological significance that it has been preserved and protected, again, to a couple of kilometers. The tourism, the number of tourists who can enter the Nandi Hills have been restricted. The kind of, let's say those panels or the towers which would be constructed for electricity, wires, those have been restricted, and Nandi Hills have been given a protection so that the ecosystem in Nandi Hills, which actually thrives a large part of the city Bengaluru, is protected. Similarly, in where I am from and from where I speak today, this area is known as Maidan area, which is again at the heart of the city of Kolkata. So the High Court of Kolkata has accorded protection to this entire area so that and they have termed this Maidan area as the lungs of the city, Kolkata. So these are the ways by which, while we develop cities, we can, in some sense, protect the nature as well as the human rights and the human beings. So Mark was mentioning about the solar panels, and recently the Supreme Court of India has come up with a decision which basically stemmed from the fact that the Great Indian Bustard, which is a bird, they were dying because of the kind of infrastructural setup of the solar panels. So what could be the ideal balance between the rights of the bird and the rights against climate change, which is a human right, was something that was being debated and discussed. So, these are the things that we really need to think about. These are the issues which I'm trying to flag. I don't really have an answer to it. It is all of you who would possibly, I hope, would be taking these into account and develop and put this on the research that you would be doing. Similarly, this decision that I have with you from the state of Uttarakhand, which is again a north part of India. It's a state in the northern part of India. Mohammed Salim versus state of Uttarakhand is a very celebrated decision because it was about preserving and protecting the rights of rivers Ganga and Yamuna. So it is a decision which is about protecting the rivers against river pollution. And accordingly, there have been 2 projects which have been launched by the government of India, the central government of India, which is the Ganga Rejuvenation Bill 2018, following which we have a Ganga Action Plan and Namami Gange project. So the course of the entire river Ganga, which is a very, very famous and sacred river, is through the almost the entirety of the northern part of India. And the course that the Ganga river travels is very, very long. But and there are major cities there, cities which are very important in terms of textiles, in terms of business. So river Ganga was getting polluted. So this project was initiated where there have been a lot of technological developments have been used to set up these kind of filters and those kind of instruments to ensure that there is filtration of the pollutants so that the river can still flow and that the river is not polluted. And several steps have been taken by each of these state governments to ensure that, we do not pollute the river. So, while we develop cities like Benares, like, Kolkata, all of these cities, while they are developing, we are also somehow trying to ensure that the rights of nature is also included in the mandate, in the developing of the infrastructure that you're creating. Now, why do we need it? And that's where I said that the reason we need it is so that we do not have a scenario of what you see on the right side of the screen. On the right side of the screen are the photos from the river, which is known as Belandur Lake. Rather, it's a lake, not a river. It's a lake, Belandur Lake, again from the city of Bangalore. So by looking at these photographs, no one would be able to say that it is a lake. Due to the pollution that the city had, contributed to, the lake has become so polluted that you see the froth and all the chemicals coming out from the lake. It is very difficult to really pass through this area. People who were staying in this area earlier had to relocate because of this issue. So we see that, unless and until we are looking at some harmonious existence, a harmonious coexistence of the humans and that of Mother Nature, we will definitely lead to a catastrophe. And we, I think, are looking at avoiding that. So when we're talking about sustainable development, we are talking about this harmonious existence. And so my appeal to all of you who are working in developing cities and, all of you who are a part of this entire mammoth conference, that please, for once, sit back, take 2 steps back and think that if at all in the proposals that you have, can we avoid a scenario where a scenario like what has been happening with the Great Indian Bustard, or what is happening with lakes like the Belandur Lake? And can we propose something which will be in tandem with the human rights, as well as right to development, as well as rights of Mother Nature? Because we are talking about dependence and sustenance of both these entities, the humans and the non-humans together. And that is where we look at rights of nature as the possible consideration which will make cities smarter. And with that, I conclude, and I'm really open to having any kind of questions that you might have. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Samaba. It's very nice to end, the whole panel on such an interesting perspective because, in the previous couple of speakers, obviously we've talked about all the potential solutions and potential technologies, but it's good that Samaba pointed out, there's a new perspective that we can all, think about and put that into consideration when we, develop all these big ideas that we all try to do, for a common cause, for a common reason to, more sustainable and a smarter city. So given the time, I think we should probably hop into the Q&A session. I'm looking at a list of questions right now, so I'm glad to be able to share a couple of those. So first one, I have one for Kevin here from our audience. So he's asking, what are the policy obstacles for the Hong Kong government to increase significantly the deployment of renewable energies, especially solar, wind, and some other types of renewable energies? So Kevin, would you like to address that?
Yes, sure. Well, I think the main actually, I've been observing Hong Kong's government's policies on climate and renewable energy for many years, and actually I feel actually there's a very strong how to say inertia I would say inside the government that's actually to push any changes in renewable energy. But despite there's actually a target actually set in the Climate Action Plan 2050, I think that there's actually the political determination and willingness or ambition is actually still lagging. And I would say actually, if I could put it this term, because actually I think if you really want to deploy renewable energy massively, significantly, actually we need a lot of public acceptance, public awareness of these energy are the solution. But indeed, it doesn't happen in our public conversation. It's still actually like my organization, CarbonCare, InnoLab, actually have been promoting solar energy for many years with our SolarCare program. They're promoting solar PV deployment in the non-profit sector, but actually it's only within the NGO sector, within the non-profit sector. So at the public level, it's still lacking. I mean, that kind of conversation, that kind of debate is still lacking. I think one of the very good example is actually like the solid waste the solid waste charging scheme, which actually have been tested for many years actually by the government. But indeed, until very recently, actually there's still people resisting this kind of solid waste charging. So I think it's important that if we don't have government ambition to push a policy with and the government willing to take up the the responsibility, ambition to embrace this solution and increase the public acceptance of these kinds of renewable energy, I don't think it will actually be successful. So I think it is important the government is willing to take up their responsibility to enlarge the ambition. Yeah. This is my short answer, probably.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. So I've got another question, which is sort of related, but I guess it expands to other governments as well. So this question asks: so there are still instances where government have approved exploration of fossil fuel or described their inability to come up with a time frame for coal to completely phase out. So they're asking if you can let us know your thoughts on how these political changes can be challenges rather can be navigated in our endeavor to achieve net zero. And then the second part of the question is, should we be relying on carbon sequestration technologies in the future wherever fossil fuels cannot be removed completely? So I guess this is an open question to any of you if you want to give your take at this.
Maybe I can try a little bit.
Yeah, sure, Kevin, go on.
Yeah. Actually, I feel it is it's government. As you can see, actually, even very recently, G7 government actually they pledged to phase out coal by 2040. I think it's very late. Actually, it comes very late. I mean, the time schedule or the kind of phase out. So I would see that these political challenges is not only political challenges. It's actually the challenges from of course the vested interests from the oil companies and so on and so forth, and they still want to keep as such. I mean the fossil fuel sectors, and I would say of course they push for many different solutions. So such as I mean the Jasvinder, right? But Jasvinder saying actually he mentioned about carbon sequestration technologies. It's not only carbon sequestration. There are so many engineering solutions like the CCS, carbon capture and storage, like the hydrogen, like ammonia, and there's so many solutions actually to sustain the fossil fuel sector. So I think I would think that it is actually without I mean the ambition to really phase out fossil fuel. I think you can still see they are promoting these kind of so-called solutions without really addressing the issue that actually I mean the like by deploying a massively renewable energy. So I think if you're talking about governments, it's not only talking about governments, it's talking about actually the struggle between the governments, the fossil fuel vested interests, and so on and so on and so forth. Yeah, so a lot of struggles between inside. I mean the different key actors. Yeah.
Okay, so does Mark or Pascal want to respond to that? Otherwise, I also have some other questions queuing up.
Yeah, just to add to what Kevin said, I think it's very difficult. One of the key highlights of the COP in Dubai was agreeing on whether it should be coal phase out or coal phase down. And it took, I think, 2 or 3 days to actually reach an agreement on the specific term to reach to use in that document. And then they agreed on a coal phase down instead of a coal phase out. Now, it's really true what Kevin said, that the oil companies, the fossil fuel companies have a high stake, and they have also made a lot of investments. And then there's the tendency for stranded assets should we have a rapid shift from this sector. But for developing countries, I will give the example of, say, like South Africa. It's one of the heavily like coal-dependent countries. So it's also a question of finance, like the switch to this renewable energy technologies or investments. It requires a lot of financial resources. So one of the key highlights again at the COP was they call it just transition partnerships. And I think that's something that can be replicated to other countries between these developing and then developed countries. So they actually had this partnership with the EU, France, UK, and then the US over, I think, a 20-year period. And then they are going to help finance the transition from this sector. And in I don't know if it's Dr. Pascal or Kevin did mention the question of just transitions. The phasing out of these fossil fuels also comes with a lot of challenges. This is an industry that is well established, and a lot of people depend on it for their livelihoods. So shifting from this to the renewable also means that we have to do reskilling and upskilling to ensure that people do not lose out of the process. So I think it's very good for governments to kind of look at this from a very broad perspective, and not just focus on, say, okay, we need to invest in renewables and then we have to push out all the fossil. We need to think of the consequences and try to do it in a gradual way.
Okay, thank you. So more questions here. This one, it will be for Pascal. So they're asking if there is any reliable estimate of how much solar energy can be technically deployed in Hong Kong specifically, and how much solar energy can be generated in terms of the percentage of overall energy generation of the city.
Yeah, maybe just a very quick answer to that, right? The official number in the plan is roughly 4% for solar PV, which of course does not take into account any kind of BIPV potential, right? I mentioned before the BIPV potential technically is around 20 to 25%, right? So if we kind of combine these numbers, we could get something around, maybe 25% of electricity demand could be covered locally on the spot, right, where electricity is actually being used. So therefore would also be much more efficient in the way it would actually be produced and then consumed, right? So that's probably the number, right? 25%, but then requires certain business models and policy support to actually exploit.
Right. Okay. And then just a quick follow-up as well. In terms of, you mentioned the experience about Hong Kong and Tokyo. There's this question about, for some other countries, or, is there, what can they learn from, especially for the ones that are less developed, what can they learn from, these successful experiences in Tokyo, for example? What can they take from, these examples?
I think the major benefit of BIPV is, of course, is reducing the cost of building materials, right? So any place where you use similar kind of building materials, then there is a use case for BIPV. Of course, in less developed places where we use different types of building materials which are not as easily replaceable, that might be a challenge at hand, right? However, BIPV does not require large-scale high-rise buildings. It can be deployed on any kind of building type in that matter, right? And replace building material costs. So looking at kind of the cost structure of building materials and construction, and then comparing it to BIPV in your local jurisdiction would kind of define the use case. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then here's a question for Somaba. So she's the attendee was very inspired by the concept of rights nature, but then she did notice that many of these urban green space are occupied by the rich and construct for high value added activities. And so for the grassroots, what can we actually do to enhance the public's accessibility to nature in urban areas?
So I think this is really about taking the prerogative, the personal prerogative. And to share an anecdote, this is from Canada. While I was in Canada, I was in Montreal, where I was informed that the particular place that I was visiting on that particular day, there were proposals to demolish one of the parks there, to construct, I think, a shopping center or something like that. But all the people of that locality, they actually sat down with, I believe, the mayor or the committee that looks after or gives approvals to such constructions and demolitions and all of it. And it was a hard time, but then they could finally convince that they would not like to have the demolition of that park which was there. And so it was stalled. So, I really feel that it is really on the people to take that initiative. And it has to be from a micro level to the macro level. And the attempt that we are doing at GARN, and also personally, while I teach at the National Law University here, our effort is to ensure that, one person can bring that change. And so if today we can, let's say, impart this to the younger population, then after a couple of years, when they would be there deciding for policies, when they would be there heading such departments which talk about the policy initiatives, they will be having an orientation at the back of their mind where they would possibly be not as anthropocentric as our ancestors or as we are. So, that's really the idea. We have to speak up. We have to ensure that, as you said, the one who asked the questions to you, as you said, that, how would that access be there? You have to create that access if it is taken away from you, because you are surviving. And if your existence is at threat and that of Mother Nature's existence is at threat, then there is no sustainable existence. So it's for us to really take it forward.
Thank you. So given the time, I think we'll take one or two more questions. Here's one for Mark. So going back to your examples on Bangkok and Jakarta, how did the people actually resolve the issues of peer pressure and also to overcome the so-called NIMBY for solar installation?
All right. So for the data from Jakarta and Bangkok, like I said, these are just initial analysis. I haven't looked into that part of the data yet. But more generally, to deal with these issues, one of the key tools is zoning and then land use policies, especially if it's between individual neighbors. So every city in the urban planning regulations, there's normally the building code that has to be followed. And this includes specific provisions for integrating, say, PV systems or any other renewable energy systems into your building. So when before anyone does this installation, first, you need to conduct this assessment, and then you have to get an expert to do that. And this is where the renewable energy like solar home system installers come in. So they have to do the evaluation, check even the quality of your structure, and then do the implications of you having that particular technology in your home in relation to, say, your neighbors. For example, considering the height, if I put the solar on my, say, building, does that affect my neighbor's ability to have the same? And Once this is sorted technically and it's feasible, it shouldn't be a problem. But then the main challenge is like large scale, say community-based solar schemes where they have to use a large portion of like land in the community. And then the community members will have to say like, we agree to this or we don't agree to this, then it becomes a problem. And I think as Dr. Somaba mentioned, it normally has to do with the issue of nature conservation. So in those instances, community engagement is very important. Before you do such a project in the community, you have to sit down with them. You need to let them know what the project is about, what are the benefits, what are the costs, and what mitigative measures you are going to put in place. And if you are able to come to terms with them, then you can proceed with the project. So these are some strategies that can be used. I hope that when we finish our analysis, I'll get more specific examples from Bangkok and Jakarta.
Okay, thank you. So I think we'll end this session with this very last question, because given, the whole idea of holding these sort of panel discussions is to sort of create and curate more exchange and collaboration. So this question would be good to, tie everything together. So it asks, how can knowledge exchange and collaboration between Hong Kong and other Asian cities and even globally, examples, help to address these identified obstacles? So does anyone want to, give a stab at this, and then we can end this pretty soon?
Just a quick example, like one of the ways, at least from my institute here at the UNU, is through expert meetings and also like workshops. So recently, a few weeks back, we had a delegation from the, I think, Jakarta city government. So there were experts in urban planning, and then we did a workshop for them. Like one of the lead researchers on this project held a workshop on this like solar PV and other renewable energy integration in cities. And we do also have students, like PhD students do come for workshops. We had one last year, which I also participated in facilitating from also from Indonesia, about 32 of them, where we sort of discuss. And the good thing is you have the opportunity to learn from other countries because we sort of have a broad range of experts from different countries. So in the workshop, we are able to share and then learn from different perspectives.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mark. So I think this will, wrap our session pretty nicely. Once again, thank you so much for all our speakers today for taking your time and sharing your insights in this informative discussion. So if our fellow audience are more interested in some more sessions, we do have one last panel discussion right after this, which looks at the role of women in the energy sector. So please come along if you're interested. And also we do have more sessions coming up tomorrow, so stay tuned for those as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.